And we are live, guys, with Mando and James Investanswers. How are you doing today?
Doing great, guys. How are you?
Fantastic. James, how are you doing?
Good. We're still in that sideways chop, which we'll talk about today.
We have a lot to talk about. We'll talk. Are we in the hangover phase of Bitcoin? What's happening with the ETF flows? They have weakened, and we are really seriously under attack by US government entities. The whole industry is. What is happening? What will it lead to? We will talk about some positive news. We will talk about macro. Both James and Mando are very experienced here. I am very interested actually to hear your take on this. What's happening with the Japanese yen, and will the US dollar follow next? We'll talk about the tech stocks, the earnings, and we have some recovery. What's happening with Solana? It's a congestion solved. And also we'll talk about, because Mando is really experienced in NFTs, memes, airdrops, things that we haven't covered so much on this show before. And now we have the expert here. So and anything else you want to talk about, guys, just write good questions in the comments and we'll try to cover them. Should we start with the Bitcoin? What's happening, guys? What's your take? Who wants to start?
Maybe James, because I know you follow these flows very, very, very well.
This is interesting. I think I actually have a slide I was just trying to upload, but StreamYard is so slow. A couple of things happening. One, I think the ETFs have definitely slowed down in how much they're pumping into these ETFs. They were a little bit nervous, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, what happens after the Bitcoin halving? And they hit the pause button. But also it had me thinking, I was looking at some history. When you dig into the history of exactly what happens with Bitcoin, kind of before and after the halving, all the historic cycles, basically 30 days after the halving, Bitcoin chops sideways. It goes up either 5% or falls down 5%. On average, it's 5% gain. So with that, it's not surprising what's happening right now. However, we do have a wild card, and this just came in breaking news. And let me make sure I can pull it up and say it correctly. The Hong Kong ETF issuer expressed confidence that the issuance scale of the
Are you sharing the?
No, I'm not. I haven't uploaded the slides yet. But the Hong Kong ETF issuer believes they could match the first day of US inflows of about 125 million. And there's many investors as well in Singapore, Middle East, and other places that are interested. It's not just Hong Kong and not just high net worth individuals in mainland China, but the issuers are confident they get 125 million in the first day, which would match the US ETFs. So a lot of people discounted Hong Kong, and I hope they are right. I hope it's not a nothing burger. But again, like we discussed last week, you'd be surprised how much money Asia has. Now, that being said, the question is, when will the US ETFs get confidence post-halving and return again? And what's also interesting is it's very clear the ETFs have had a huge impact since January 11th. Both up and to the downside, but at the same time, we've also been punched in the face with the FTX liquidation, the DCG Genesis liquidation, the concern about Grayscale and their fees. So it hasn't been perfect, and I would love to run a scenario. What would it have looked like if Grayscale didn't exist? So, my thoughts.
And Mando, what's your thought? Because it starts looking a little heavy here. Starts looking a little toppy almost on the chart.
Yeah, look, I think you can be very, very bullish, and then I think you can also not be blind to like short-term moves here. I think I'm still super bullish on Bitcoin adoption. I thought everything was set up for a bit of a rebound, if I'm honest. Like funding was low, open interest had decreased substantially. We'd had 2 weeks of outflows, but they were mainly GBTC related, and it felt like that was going to start waning after they changed their fees. Last week we got another outflow, even with Bitcoin down, what is it, 15% and at times 20% from that local high. So I'm definitely aware that we're in a more precarious situation here. Bitcoin is holding up okay for 3 weeks of outflows. The rest of crypto, Bitcoin has caught a cold. The rest of crypto has got the flu right now. It's really not trading well versus where Bitcoin is. And I think you have to be cognizant that it's looking a bit more precarious. So I would be unsurprised if we had a little bit of a test lower. I'm definitely not as bullish as I was last week. There were a couple of hot takes on this this week, which I thought over the last 24 hours at least. You had Jim Bianco, who's like a well-known, I guess, economist in the space. Used to work for various different banks. He came out and said, "Look, if we start to go low, you could see some of these ETFs actually turn as sellers. Some of these people, some of the holders, are people who are not really long-term holders." And you could start to see outflows actually pick up if they kind of follow price action, if they become a little bit more uncertain about the macro standing, which I thought was a very interesting take. You had Bernstein come out and say the complete opposite. And they said, look, this is just temporary. We think Bitcoin's going to 150K. We're as bullish as ever. And then you had Peter Brand, who's like a well-known trader in the space, saying this lines up with 70K being the cycle top, which... people are starting to have pretty hot takes, I think, on where we're going from here. For me, I'm just waiting to see. I'm a little bit backward looking, and I guess I'm trying to wait to see how the ETF approaches day by day. But if we saw another week of ETF outflows, I definitely think about reducing a little bit, or at least be aware of having some stop losses in case we have quite more of an aggressive dip down. There's a lot more. I wouldn't say macro had an okay week last week. Tech stocks, I think, had the best week they've had in 6 months since November or something like that. So they really did bounce back fast. And the gold is still hanging out near all-time high. But I would say the risk of tail events has increased in macro. Like, people are a lot more worried. We had obviously what happened in the Middle East is more of a tail event. World War III, could that happen? And then you've now had people getting very, very worried about tail events in places like in Japan and some of the Southeast Asian economies. And I'm just aware of that. So if we do end up having like a bit of a jolt down in macro, this doesn't look as supportive as an environment for Bitcoin if we have another one of those events.
Do you think that this had anything to do with sorry, which tab was it? The like that you cannot use the ETFs as
collateral.
As collateral, exactly. Sorry, I lost the tab here. But
DTCC law.
Exactly. So they came out the news that you can't use the ETFs as collateral. Do you guys think that had anything to do with this? Has it been known and front run in among the ETF holders, or is it unrelated?
Yeah, there's so few that can use it as collateral anyway. It's just a preemptive strike, I think, which will be reversed ultimately, because an asset is an asset. And the other interesting thing is you can actually lend out your shares for Microstrategy, which is a Bitcoin proxy.
Yeah, so I thought about that. This must be beneficial for Microstrategy, because that you can use as collateral, right? Because it's a stock, it's not an ETF. So the rule was for ETFs.
I think it's just very clear the US government is right now the people in control. They're very anti-innovation, very afraid. They need the US dollar hegemony to continue and the luxury of money printing to continue. They don't want anything threatening that. And you're seeing attacks from all sides. And they're ramping up again. We thought kind of the SEC, etc., had gone away, but it seems like they're back in play once again. And I have one other little slide. I uploaded the deck. If you could share that real quick. The cool thing about what Bitcoin does, and I'm not saying history will repeat, but if it does, it's the 30 days. The 3 months after the halving can be very spectacular. The average return for the 90 days after the halving. So the first 30 days of the 90 days is dead. And then the next 60 days of the 90 days can be bombastic, with the exception of Epoch 2, which was a very strange time as well back in the market. But either way, as we saw with certain assets, like Tesla, that just added $50, 50 points in 5 days. And Bitcoin can do that too. We don't know when that catalyst is going to occur, when the FUD will go away. But all I'm saying is the risk of not being in the market, perhaps, Mando, is higher than, trying to be smart and get out of the market and wait.
Yeah, so. I completely agree with that. Like, if you're a trader, then it's quite different than being a long-term holder. I'm just saying I'm not blind to the idea that we're not where we were in terms of flows. So I thought we could weather quite a lot of FUD actually when we're seeing constant inflows from the ETF, and now that that's slowed, I think the Hong Kong ETF could be a big unknown. I agree with that. Like, let's see how that goes. That could be very, very strong. But I don't know, with tail events risks increasing in macro, I'm just more aware of it. Like, I'm just not, I don't think we are going to moon back to 72K now. It just feels slightly more precarious. I think we could be either ranging here for a little bit longer, or I would be unsurprised if this feels a little bit more like a dip.
And there's stress everywhere. Stress in commercial real estate, stress in US real estate, stress in commercial and regional banks. We had another top 250 bank hit the wall on Friday last week. So there's a lot of stress in the system. But that being said, when there is stress in the system, I always say Bitcoin loves a crisis, and it tends to do well when things hit the fan, as they say. So we'll watch it.
And I think it's not so surprising that after the halving, there comes like a what now feeling. It was exactly the same after the ETFs. People thought, oh, now this big event is happening. Now it's going to moon, it's going to shoot to 100K and so on, and then nothing happens. And the reason then is that, I mean, these effects are nothing that happens overnight. But with ETFs, then slowly and surely, there actually came inflows. And I think it's the same thing with the halving. I mean, this is not going to shoot up the price automatically. It's like a long-term effect. There's slightly less issuance coming out. And over time, that might have an effect. But it's not like an event that shoots the price up.
Yeah.
And while people expect that, and then it doesn't happen, and then they get disappointed instead, and they sell, and price goes down, and that's heavy. So I think that this could be a big opportunity, actually. And if someone is interested, because I saw that a lot of people talked about exactly that model with the declining state of the strength of the parabolas. I actually did this model back in February 21. So if someone is interested, you can go back and check on that. And what I actually said that there are two possible outcomes. It can kind of box in the two scenarios. One is like the parabolas, but the other one is that there is half the pump historically has been after the halving, and half the pump has been before the halving. And that kind of boxes in these two scenarios, and Peter Brandt said the same thing. Now people are kind of stressed and nervous, and they're taking out one of the scenarios, but there were actually two, and he had the same opinion. So this was just one that kind of ended up in 70,000. The other one ends up in 300,000. So I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind as well.
And one other topic on that as well. At the end of the day, this thing is driven by scarcity and demand, the bid that comes in. If there's no bid, there's no demand. Scarcity doesn't really matter that much. And that's all we need to look at. So if you look at parabolas and power laws and all that type of stuff, throw that all out the window. It's really just about the bid and how much is coming in and how scarce it is and who's selling and how afraid the market is. That's it. Don't overthink this.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think often in times like this, where I think it's 4 weeks of Bitcoin hitting red candles, right, and we're maybe on for a fifth already. Narratives follow price. It's not the other way around. Like, suddenly people look around and they go, "Oh, this is what's causing us to go lower," and people start to freak out. Like, people are getting very worried about Japanese yen. I know we're going to even get onto it, but if the Japanese yen was such a worry, why did tech stocks just have their best week in 6 months? Why is gold still like near all-time highs? Like, these are the things that would take crypto higher. And I think the other point is what James said, is that Bitcoin does love a crisis. You know, like, it doesn't like it for the first couple of weeks, like what we saw with when the US banks started collapsing, or a few of them regional banks started collapsing around this time last year, or slightly further. But after that, it then goes much, much higher. So the only scenario here, if Japanese yen really does become a problem, we're probably just bringing forward QE, and that would probably just mean that we absolutely rip. So I'm not saying that you should you should get out of the market. I guess I'm just saying is that I'm just not as bullish that we're going to go to the highest levels that we've seen, just because of the way I see things panning out in terms of flows.
Yeah. By the way, when Silicon Valley Bank hit the wall after hours on Friday night, Bitcoin mooned over the weekend because everybody's like, oh my God, this is the end of the world here. SVB is massive. And how do we get safety? And Bitcoin did really well. So
it dumped right before that. It did dump hard right before that, and then it went.
Yeah.
And we love some volatility. It's an opportunity in the market. If everything went on a straight, predictable line up, there would be no opportunity. So we love that. Then we must talk about the quite aggressive things happening on the US regulatory front. There's a lot of things happening, and it has some consequences. It's basically, it has to do with the Tornado Cash litigation, but I think it could have implications beyond that, not just on these privacy solutions that they are in fact prosecuting, but it could also have wider effect. And I'm really interested to hear what you guys think. I tried to read some of the actual text, and they kind of argue that even if a business doesn't handle the private keys, even if they don't have the private keys, it is a wallet. While if you could change the business slightly and then you have the private keys, it's still kind of, you're still a money transmitter. That is what the US government is saying here in reply to the defense from this Tornado Cash. They're saying that because that's been the defense. The defense has been that they didn't handle the private keys. But then they're saying, yeah, but you still had the website with the user interface, and it's like a technical detail whether you stored the keys or not, because another business could have stored the keys. And then they're saying then that so the business can still be a money transmitter, liable business. And as consequence, I'm an engineer, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know the laws, can barely understand the text, but it does have some effect on how companies are acting now in the US. And I feel that Eric, for his tweet, summed it up by saying the number of services that now say not available to residents of North Korea, Cuba, Iran, and the United States of America is proof that America is on the road to prosperity and greatness. I thought that was a little bit funny because it's kind of true. That's exactly the text you start seeing on a lot of crypto services now. So, and of course, because people are concerned, the authorities are very aggressive here, and no one really knows what is permitted or not. It feels like the baseline is changing day by day and week by week. So what's your take on this? What's going to happen? Are they going after decentralized finance and only Bitcoin can remain? Or what's your take on this? I'm not sure myself. Who wants to start?
Sure, I can. I mean, I think it's all slightly related here. A lot of these cases are similar. It's the same case that they brought against MetaMask last week as well, and Consensus has clapped back and trying to sue the SEC about it. But it basically says that these wallets are either unlicensed broker dealers or they are money transmitters. I just am completely perplexed with the US attitude towards crypto, if I'm honest. Like, I just do not understand it, that they seem to be very, very aggressively going after operators in the space. For me, I continue to think that crypto could just be a massive use case for the US in terms of dollar power, and to go after operators in the space, even like legitimate ones or the most legitimate ones and things like Coinbase, just seems crazy to me. So I think you will see this, though. There's a lot of people that do not have the money to fight, like Consensus, the SEC, and I think you saw this happen with many different cases in like the even in the NFT space when I was involved. Like, people just ring fence the US because they just can't be bothered with the headache. It's not that they agree with the SEC. They just don't have the funds to fight them, and they can't be bothered to face the headache until somebody with more funds fights them. So I think we could be in for this as a scenario. I'd be very, very unsurprised. I think MetaMask will probably stay because they're fighting the case, But a lot of the smaller wallets, because I think the Samurai co-founders were arrested as well last week, right? Like, or at least they faced some form of charges. So I think you'll see this from a lot of smaller operators in the DeFi and wallet space.
What's your take, James? You always have great insights.
Well, the US, what they, ever since 9/11 hit, they want to know where the money's coming from, where the money's going. It's that simple. That's why the drug dealers deposit $9,000 to lots of regional community banks, credit unions, so it can't be tracked, because they track amounts over 10 grand. So I think Tornado Cash was tied up with some Korean player way back when, North Korean player way back in the day. So a lot of the Tornado Cash stuff and maybe Samurai stuff, it's all non-KYC. And that's, I think, the initial point that really scares the US government. They want to know who's got the money, maybe because they want to hit them for unrealized capital gains taxes in the future, which is another piece of nonsense out of the US government lately. Also, where's the money going? That's basically the premise of a lot of this, I think. Now, what happens with wallets? Can they shut everyone down? No, because new ones will pop up. And that's the beauty of decentralization. So they're fighting a losing battle, I think, over time, but they will cause a ruckus. And the real problem that I really hate is they are anti-innovation. And there's two big things happening in the world, AI and crypto. And they're pushing crypto out the door. Who knows what they'll do next? So that's a bit sad. That's my take.
I think you're muted, CTO.
Thank you. Yeah, I think so too. I think it will result in a lot of smaller players leaving because they just don't want to take the risk. I think the positive spin on this, because they're referring this 1960 prohibition of illegal money transmitting business. That's what they are going after. And they're referring to this. But actually, that clause, now again, I'm not lawyer, so I'm an amateur trying to understand what's going on. But that's under something called Chapter 95 racketeering. And racketeering, which I barely knew what it means, that's typically something to do with fraud, extortion, bribery, threats, violence, or other illegal means. So I think that perhaps it's not as bad as it seems. They are specifically going after Tornado Cash, which I think they argue then was in that category. They kind of facilitated a lot of that stuff. True or not, I don't know. But I'm not sure they're going to bring those same claims to something like MetaMask, or I don't know, some more generic service which doesn't have these privacy type features. So that's my take on it. It might not be as bad as it seems now, but I do think that Eric is right here. This unfortunately becomes the consequence of this kind of moving target. No one knows what is permitted or not, and then they go arrest some random programmer who has no idea about any of this. He has never seen these laws or clauses or anything, and they go and arrest some random people. Then all the other programmers are gonna freak out and quit this. But I don't think they're going after open source. I don't think they want to stop the whole thing. I think they're specifically going after things they feel is running a service targeting criminal activity. Right.
And one other thing to bear in mind too is pretty clear that the SEC is not a I don't want to use the word corrupt, but hey, what the hell, organization. But there is a conflict here, and that is in the Constitution. Technically, if you interpret it correctly, software is code, which is actually freedom of speech. So you can't actually shut software down. And that's another interesting angle too. So if it did come to a big Supreme Court case, odds are they'd lose, the SEC, like they have done against even XRP and Coinbase, etc., etc.
And it's funny, like this whole industry is like 10, 15 years in, and no one still has any idea what code are you allowed to program and what code are you not allowed to program. It is so unclear, especially in the US, and it's very unfortunate, actually. It really prevents a lot of innovations. I hope that the rules become clear, if nothing else, as soon as possible, so we don't face these consequences, that it becomes the end of Lightning, it becomes the end of DEX, because everyone's worried that it is a money transmitter and you might go to jail if you publish that code. So I think on the positive side, there are big companies that are taking the opposite approach here, notably Stripe, which is powering internet payments on the whole internet. Everything you buy almost, this goes through Stripe on the internet. And I don't know anything more. I just read the news. I tried to read more about it, but clearly they will start accepting USDC stablecoin. I don't know exactly the details, but if this happens, this is gigantic. If you can actually start paying with USDC over Stripe, you can buy anything with crypto suddenly. Basically anywhere in the world to anything. All internet services are running on Stripe almost. They are like the PayPal of this century. And yeah, PayPal has some symbolic value, but it's Stripe that's actually running the business. James, I saw that you...
Yeah, I can't remember what somebody said once. Basically, the whole internet, every web app is basically a wrapper of Stripe, pretty much, because it is everywhere, and it's a private company, so we don't know exactly how many transactions per day, how many hundreds of millions go through it, but it's massive, and they're back because I think they left in 2018 just to make sure there's no heat, but now they see exactly what's happening, and the key here is they're very clever. Some of the cleverest entrepreneurs in the world are in Stripe. And it has, I don't know what the latest valuation was, but it's in the tens of billions of dollars, if I recall. But here, this is what they're looking at. This is Visa. And Visa now are doing a lot of activities on the blockchain with stablecoins. And of course, the number one processor for Visa is Solana. Number two is Binance Smart Chain. And, you know, they're looking at Visa here, and Visa is probably one of their primary competitors. And they're saying, hey, we want a piece of this. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to sit in the sidelines anymore. Regulators be damned. And you cannot, like the US government should be embracing players like USDC and Tether because of how much they promote the dollar hegemony. That's a weird thing. You know, it's like, look, the number one buyer of treasuries many months ago was Tether. You know, they're buying 10 billion every 10 weeks or so. It's nuts. So. Okay,
I need to clarify something. I see some people asking in the comments. No, Stripe is not like Cash App. Most people have never heard about Stripe because you don't see the brand Stripe. But you go to a website, you go to your favorite flower shop, or you go to check out your holiday trip, or you buy your ChatGPT subscription, and there will be a form asking for your credit card number. You enter your card number, and you purchase, and you get your stuff. Throughout this, you never see Stripe. You never heard about Stripe. But that company that's offering that service, Stripe is providing that form and charging the money and then depositing that money on the flower shop's bank account. And Stripe is the by far leading player in this. So this is like powering most of the internet payment. I think it's like in the $1 trillion. So this is gigantic. If they are adding support for stablecoin payments, you can actually start using crypto. We don't need all those card solutions then, because you can take the MasterCard or whatever you already have and use basically you don't need to use that either. I'm trying to say, that was actually wrong. So the company that has already built the payment rail, the flower shop, whatever, they can suddenly start charging in USDC then. That's how it will work.
Yeah, the only thing I would add here is I'd really recommend going and watching the video. I think the CEO or maybe the CTO of Stripe actually goes on and they show you how it's going to be done. I think he uses a Phantom wallet or using Solana to make the payment, and it's very seamless. I don't even think there's a transaction. There's like no waiting time on the transaction. They when they came in before, they came on the Bitcoin network. I think they even tried to find Lightning, and they had some issues with payment times. And he kind of jokes about that in the speech that he makes. But with Solana, obviously, it's within microseconds. So I think they're really going to try and push this. And
very interesting. Where is it? We will figure out the link and post it in the description because I definitely want. I haven't watched it. I want to see that also.
it's worth
So
watching.
Solana saves the day.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's big for stable coins. I think if Visa and Stripe are now both behind Solana, you could really see a big flow of stable coins moving through it.
I mean, I think this will be massive, actually. 100%. All right, let's move on to the macro situation. To just give a little bit of background to everyone. Hang on, let me switch this around. So we have a situation where the Japanese yen to the US dollar suddenly reached a level that it hasn't been at since 1990. It hit exactly that level. And this has been going on for some time. That was in the head and shoulder here, and so on. Before I ask you guys to comment on it, I tried to read a little bit, and actually this isn't really new. I just learned. So the public debt as percentage of GDP already 2022, Japan was in the top there, if this is correct. This is from IMF. 2022, here Japan was the highest in the whole world, then came Sudan, and then United States comes pretty high on this list out of all the countries at 122%. And interestingly is that many of these countries have really increased this ratio a lot during the past decades. But Japan here, this, I don't know if it's visible through the YouTube, but this line here is Japan. This line here was United States. And yeah, United Kingdom as well. And basically almost all of these have increased. So as far as I can understand, that this isn't really new, that they have a high debt to GDP ratio, but the kind of collapse almost of the yen is new. That happened this week. Who wants to start on this? Who wants to start on this interesting topic, and what does it mean? Will it kind of, is USD next?
Yeah, well, Japan is a very special case because they're a perfect storm of badness all happening at the same time, kind of gradually and then slowly. First of all, they do have very low interest rates compared to other countries. That makes the yen very unattractive. They have a very loose monetary policy, which means a ton of printing. Also, one of the big issues, and a lot of stuff we're going to see over the next couple of decades, is the aging population issue and negative birth rates. They have that big time, and it's a huge problem. Then it used to be back in the day, like I used to trade dollar yen in the early 90s. It has lost its status as a safe haven currency as well, which is a big problem. And what people don't realize about Japan is they have to import everything. I think they even import rice, oil, steel, aluminium, everything. And they used to be kind of like a superpower from the automotive industry, but now Korea has eaten their lunch. And of course, there's another player going to eat their lunch too. But that's a separate issue. So this is just a short, deadly spiral out of control, and nothing can stop it. And other fiats will follow. This is just a perfect storm in a teacup where they have no choice but to shrivel up and die. And in fact, I know a couple of people that have gone to Japan lately, and I used to travel a lot to Japan. I used to go there every 2 weeks for a certain amount of time. And I remember it was always a very expensive place, but now people can go there and rent beautiful apartments for $600 a month. So it's become, it went from being one of the most expensive places in the world to now very reasonable, so that's Japan.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Japan, it's always had this very high debt to GDP ratio. One thing it does have is very high national ownership of that debt. So people have said, and it's often in Japanese institutions, which is quite important when it comes to debt markets. And actually, this is a perfect example of why Japan, so it has a high debt to GDP ratio. It's managed to maintain that for a long, long time without it getting too aggressive. And luckily, inflation has been very, very low, partly due to its aging population. So it hasn't had to keep interest rates high, which means that debt hasn't become so bad that it has like a liquidity event. You've seen this this move in dollar yen this year. And that's mainly been because everyone was hoping that the Fed was going to drop rates, right? And now inflation stayed kind of high. So it looks like the US is going to be keeping rates maybe higher for longer. Wherever else, inflation's been dipping. That's the same in the EU. EU's talking about 4 cuts this year. And Japan was hoping to kind of, although they've had accommodative monetary policy, they were looking to actually make it even more accommodative. And now they're not really too sure. Now, James, you said they have nothing they can do about this. They do have one thing they can do about this. They are the biggest, or at least in the top 3, holders of US treasuries.
Yeah. What happens if they start selling the US treasuries to buy the yen back?
That is exactly
that'll ding the Dixie, which will pump Bitcoin. So that's a good thing for sure. Is that where you're going?
That's exactly what they are doing. I've been back in my old job. I've been speaking to people about why rates have been blowing out so aggressively this year. It's because Japanese institutions are hammering US treasuries right now, and they're doing that to protect the yen. So it's in this scenario, the Bank of Japan is looking to step in, and they actually actively stepped in today. It's not just that they're selling dollars to buy yen, they're selling US treasuries to buy yen. And why people are getting worried about this is because that means that bond yields go higher, and bond yields go higher. It's basically like quantitative tightening. This is what the Fed was doing, right? It was selling US treasuries. It was selling assets like this. So it's quantitative tightening by another method. Now, that can create a bit of a spiral. People can freak out. You can see bond yields go back to like 5%, and that people have been saying that's what's been driving the increase in bond yields. On the other hand, this could force the Fed to bring forward more easing, like a more relaxed policy. So it's a strange scenario right now, and that people are getting very, very bearish about Japan. They're getting very, very bearish about what the Japanese might do. And this is not just Japan, right? South Korea said as well. Thailand has had issues like this. Even China, they've all said that, and these are big owners. Well, not Thailand, but China in particular, also a big holder of U.S. treasuries. This is why Japan has been able to hold on to having a higher debt to GDP than other places, because it's mainly domestically owned. U.S. treasuries are owned by sometimes people that aren't friends with the U.S. Or at least don't have to align with their policy. So if they start selling, you could have a bit of a spiral here. And that's what people are getting bearish about. This is that tail event I was talking about, that people keep on mentioning in crypto markets, and that you could see a spiral here. Japan has to sell U.S. treasuries to protect the yen. The South Korea has to sell U.S. treasuries to protect the won. China has to sell U.S. treasuries to protect the yuan. This could hurt the U.S. and it could mean that you could have like a bit of a meltdown or a bit of a freak out. Bitcoin does well in a crisis. It may do not that great in the first 2 weeks of that sort of crisis, but I think it will do very, very well in the medium term.
Oh, very interesting. So if that happens, we could, because when there is a panic, everything dumps. Every single asset dumps. And that could be an opportunity if this kind of then turns into a more of a stimulus situation. That's what you're saying.
That would be the second order, I think, of something like this. Like, this is essentially quantitative tightening. This is what the Fed was doing, which they said they were going to stop doing, or that they were going to stop being aggressive about. Now Japan's basically going to start doing that. Maybe even China's going to start doing that. They have already been doing that. They've been reducing their treasury holdings and buying gold. Well, if this was to really spiral and things were to get really bad, and let's say bond yields were to blow out, I actually think that Bitcoin would rally. But it could very easily have a sell-off, and maybe even an aggressive sell-off like we saw, just like with the banks moving like they did. Remember, all of this sort of stuff was also what caused the banks to go lower. If bond yields go back up to 5% plus, regional banks, commercial real estate, all where we have stresses, over leverage in the system, they are linked to US Treasuries. So if we do see a sell-off in the US Treasury market, which is not just fundamental because of inflation going higher, it's technical because Japan's hammering this along with some other governments, that creates, I would say, the perfect storm for Bitcoin, but also creates a correlation of one sell-off where Bitcoin could get hurt.
Yeah, because what we're all trying to figure out is when is this thing going to pump? And what we're doing here, everyone, we're trying to paint some scenarios. We don't know what's going to happen in the future of markets. No one knows that. But by exploring these different scenarios, like what Mando just explained here, this could happen. And if we try to understand it ahead of time, if it starts playing out, like exactly those things start happening, we will not panic in the same way because we understand what's going on and we can be mentally ready that this is going to happen next, this is going to happen next. If that scenario starts playing out, perhaps it doesn't, perhaps something completely different happens. But I often find for myself that it's very helpful to explore a few different scenarios. And then it's very difficult to know which one of them will play out. But once it actually happens, it's pretty clear. Okay, now this is actually happening. This that we have been thinking out, it's actually happening. Then we're ready, we're prepared, we can take the right action at the right time. And if that scenario plays out, first there could be a dump, then there could be a pump, which could be the perfect situation, really. So thanks a lot, guys, for those insights. Let's move on to the stocks, because if the ETFs, we already talked about that, if the ETFs cannot be used as collateral, perhaps this could benefit MicroStrategy, for example. Should we start by looking at MicroStrategy a little bit? James, do you want to start? You are our champion here in MicroStrategy. Here it is.
Yeah, and in full disclosure, I've been trading this since August, September 2020. So I was the first person to realize, oh, Treasury, interesting. Good ARB here. So I've been playing it for a long time, and it is by far my biggest position. Tesla, I think, just slotted into number 2 position right now because it just went up $55 in 5 days. But the MicroStrategy, there's some interesting stuff potentially happening. One, it is heavily shorted, most ever shorted it has been in its history, and it's set to report earnings after the close, I think, today, if I'm not mistaken. I'll check the chart in a second, but they have been in discussions with FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, to modify some things. I think it's for a combination of reasons. One, to allow them to reflect the Bitcoin holdings and the gains they've made. So literally, if they can do that, the earnings per share for MicroStrategy will be obscene today. Can somebody check if it's after the close today? I'm going from memory last week. And then the second thing that is potentially happening too, as you say, there are some hedge funds short as well, and they'll need to cover. And finally, what's the other thing? The ETFs are not in favor, but this could help trigger some speculation back into Bitcoin itself. So it's a super interesting time for MicroStrategy.
Yeah, Mando, are you following this at all?
I haven't been that much. I know that there's an interesting trade here where hedge funds are shorting MicroStrategy and buying the underlying Bitcoin, and a lot of them have been absolutely hammered on that trade. It's kind of the pain trade, and there's the litany of hedge funds which have blown up trying to do it, which I quite like about the stock. Like there has this short interest to it, which means on the days that Bitcoin rips, like this thing can really go much further. So it kind of has that meme stock element to it, which is well shorted. So I like it. I think the premium, I think I still prefer to own spot Bitcoin or maybe even levered Bitcoin. But I also think that I love taking hedge funds lunch. So I hope this thing goes to the moon.
It was James on the other side against those hedge funds there.
Yeah, but there's another interesting angle, and I refer to it as the infinite money glitch, is they borrow money at 0% for 5 or 7 years, and they buy Bitcoin with it. And as Bitcoin appreciates over time, it'll pump their value, forcing other people to buy more shares. In addition, if this accounting rule goes into play, their earnings per share will melt faces. And the way you value a stock, historically, which markets are not rational, is on future earnings expectations. Their earnings are gains on Bitcoin. And the penny doesn't drop for many. Yes, there is a slight premium. Yes, it was a lot higher. Now it's actually reasonable again, like when it got squeezed to 2,000 and wrecked those hedge funds. But we could see that happen again, and it'll be a joyous time. So.
And now everyone in the comments are shouting Tesla. So, James, I think congratulations is in order. You bought some here below the dip. Then we got the bullish engulfing week last week. That candle is a bullish engulfing candle, back over support, and today price is up here. I don't know if you can see it, but it's up here, well above support again. So what's happening, James? You told everyone last week already.
Yeah. Well, it's again, it's how markets are irrational. And Amanda, you've seen this your entire life as well. People think it's a car company. And they've no idea it's not a car company. It's an energy storage company. It's an AI robotics company. And all these S curves are colliding at the same time. And guess who's in the perfect position for all of these S curves colliding? That is Tesla. And now the penny is slowly beginning to drop as well for the market. It's like, oh, what happens if they have 7 million cars on the road and 35% of them are paying $100 a month, which is pure margin, all right, because the car could drive itself. And I've been an FSD beta user for years and years. I have seen nothing so startling in my life like the advancement of FSD from version 10 to version 11 to especially now 12.3.1, 12.3.2, 4, 5. 5 just got released and they're coming out with 6 next week. I mean, they're coming out with releases every 8 days. And these are radical step changes, CTO. And you know from the software business how difficult it is to do that. And again, it's all driven by neural nets. Now, the big news why it's really pumping, not only because people are realizing it is an AI company, but I think Elon Musk flew to Beijing, surprise last minute trip over the weekend, and they want basically Tesla sell 3 times as many EVs now in China than they do in the US. People think the US is the big market. No. China is the big market. And they are looking to find a way to legally operate FSD on public roads in China. And they've put together a partnership with Baidu, which have 3D mapping. So now the Tesla cars will have 3D mapping and they'll probably get FSD approval as well. And I think China is really looking forward to bringing more capital markets and foreign investment into China. They realized closing capital markets was not good, and they've gone through a number of crises like real estate, etc. So I think the Chinese government wants to be much more open, much more cooperative with Western companies. And Elon Musk's company, by the way, is the only company, foreign company in China that's 100% owned. Normally it's sold through partnerships. So I think that's the reason for a lot of this pump right now. And it's up $56 in 5 days, which is big.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I saw a lot of people refer this FSD testing on European roads. I tried to connect with this guy. He was from Sweden apparently, but it is in Germany. So, because of course Europe is often very careful with this kind of things, and if it kind of gets progress here, then everyone will approve it for sure.
It's just a game of dominoes. So those cities that have congestion, that don't have enough cab drivers, that need this type of robotaxi thing, they will adopt because they have to. Like I heard there was a friend was in Kyoto for the Japanese Blossom Festival. Speaking of Japan again, he said you had to wait 4 hours for a cab. There was no cabs because the population quadruples for this one 5-day event, and the city is not equipped to handle it. So places like this will need exactly what we're talking about here.
How do you see the general earnings for the tech companies beyond MicroStrategy and Tesla, who are perhaps special cases in each of their own ways?
Yeah,
Mando, I know that you have been tracking this. Do you want to start, and then James?
Yeah, I mean, I was bullish on Tesla last week. I know you've been in it for a lot longer than me, James. I felt as though they could pull a lever, and it had been a very beaten up stock, and that's exactly what they did. They came out and they said, we're going to do self-driving in China, and the robo-taxi thing could be a whole new opening up of the business, I think. And that's on top of, the robot and top of just the general EV sales. So like the EV business obviously isn't doing well, but he can just pull so many different levers in the business. And I think I like it when Elon's like up against the wall with these sort of things. He's able to pull out these sort of ideas. There was an interesting. They actually covered it well in the All In podcast as well this week, and they were most bullish on the ride hailing part of the business. They think that could really compete with like Uber and Lyft, and I kind of agree with that too. And then obviously Optimus and the robot part of the business probably has the most unknown, but could be a huge win if they do that well. So it is not an EV business. It's AI and various different things masked as an EV business. So I think it's that's important to say. The rest of tech earnings have been, I would say, mixed. Facebook had earnings, or Meta had earnings this week. Interestingly, they've gone kind of open source with their Llama AI model, which could kind of be bad for Microsoft and OpenAI. Like if we have an open source LLM, which could now compete with ChatGPT. And that's interesting to see, just like how tech evolves. Like often competitors will go open source when they're trying to catch up with others. And then Google had, which has not really had a great year at times. Particularly, they've been attacked for some of their kind of ideology. They came back with strong earnings. So I think tech in general had a strong week, even though Meta was a little bit. Meta actually sold off after its earnings, mainly because people thought they were going to overspend on AI compared to this open source view. So I would say mixed, but overall tech had a very strong week. Like it had the best week in 6 months. We have a couple of other earnings this week, I think notably in Amazon and Apple. So we'll wait to see how those go. But I would definitely say it was a stronger week for tech, and just very interesting plays going on. Like I think this Meta move where they're going to go open source with their AI model, I just think that's super interesting, because we could be in a scenario where a lot of the growth in like Microsoft and what OpenAI has been doing could now be challenged if like such a foundational model of what we've been rallying on, which is AI, can now go open source, and you start to see other people able to build on that. I think it's probably positive for the whole space, but I would be definitely more cautious on things like Microsoft after I saw that come out.
Well, it was one of the beautiful things is what is it called? Closed AI, the new open AI bought by Microsoft. It's such a kick in the nuts. So basically, LLMs have been completely commoditized. The next thing we'll probably see, watch this space, will be an LLM aggregator that will be over all the open source LLMs, and you'll be able to get all you want for free. But again, just like FSD, the AI development is staggering, and people aren't ready for what's coming. It is absolutely mind-blowing. You, CTO, as a technologist, your face must be melting right now with what you're seeing out there. It's just the pace of development. And then now they're worried that there will be so many H100s running around the planet that there won't be enough electricity to run them all.
Oh, absolutely. It is absolutely astonishing. And artificial intelligence, I have my AI book laying over there on the table that I studied in university almost 30 years ago. That's how long it took for it to become really useful. But now it will keep it, even though it kind of became twice as good, not every year, but at least every second year. Now it is this enormously useful in almost any job. No one can deny that you can take help from ChatGPT or other AI services in almost any job. And now it will keep getting twice as good, again and again and again. And we can almost not phantom this. So it is absolutely, and it will disrupt so much technology, tech companies, AI, and everything around it, crypto, and the entire, that I call era digitalis. It will disrupt everything a lot more than we can imagine. Of course, it takes a long time. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's definitely on that path. Let's talk a little about some more coins. Ethereum had a big recovery in or big, but at least it was a slight recovery back to key levels after looking like it's going to drop down to almost, if not zero, but it looked really, really bad here. Then it had a slight recovery. Mando, do you want to cover? What do you think? What triggered this?
Yeah, I think there were two things that triggered it. I think about this time last week, we were just before when there were some stories out from Reuters that the ETH ETF was going to be most likely rejected. In the same day, we then saw that Consensus is going to sue the SEC for basically calling Ether security. So people got a little bit more bullish that the legal case against the SEC could be a bit more balanced, even if they move to now reject the ETF, and that they might even win. And then secondly, towards the end of the week, you saw one of the ETFs, the ETH ETFs, get listed on which is the DCC we were talking about earlier, which is one of the clearinghouses. that was indicated that we could actually still get the ETF. So people got more bullish on ETH after that. There's a couple of potentially big airdrops as well, notably Eigenlayer this week. So people are just getting more bullish on ETF, on ETH, a little bit more bearish on Bitcoin because of the flows, and a little bit more bearish on Solana because I guess some of the meme coins have been really hurt over this period. That being said, like what we've seen recently is when ETH rallies, it's kind of a bit of a mini top. Like it's the what we used to say is when Doge rallies, you worry, right? That's normally the end of like a bit of the cycle. It's been ETH recently. Like whenever ETH has a little bit of a move and everyone's like, oh, I'm going to FOMO into ETH, then we just dump. So I was kind of a bit wary when ETH started moving. And even now today, like ETH moved and then it's just kind of gone right back to where it was. Yeah. So I'm very wary of periods of ETH outperformance because they generally point to an ensuing period of us going a little bit lower. I don't know if it will follow through. Let's see how the ETF rumors go. I still think the ETF is not going to come in May. I do think the consensus has a very strong case against the SEC, but we're probably talking a few months till that gets resolved, maybe even longer than that. So I'm still not that bullish on ETH, but it was interesting to see that it rallied, and then we did then see the dump.
So should we talk a little on Solana? Would you say, James, that the congestion issues are largely solved at this point?
Everything I've read is they are 90% solved. And they came out with 2 big releases. I can't remember the actual names of them. The first one did about 30% of the problem. The next one did about 60% of the problem. So yeah, it's back, and TPS is running at way over 1,000 TPS right now. Pure transactions, not just voting transactions as well. And there was another interesting chart too, and this one here is the TPS for ETH and all the layer ones. And I always think this is funny to look at because you have Solana running at 1,000 TPS and it's simply not fast enough. And these puppies, is that the right slide? Yeah, these puppies are like the fastest one after Matic is base at 26. That's not going to cut it for this future world. And people think it will. It's not. That's why I am not optimistic on optimistic roll-ups or ETH. L2s are not solving the problem. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think this is kind of how it is. It's high fees and maybe not fast enough. People talk about the security of the network, which I do actually agree with. I think it's got a relatively secure network. But I think Solana, particularly after Fire Dancer, will be very, very difficult to argue against.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we talked about it so many times, actually, James, you and I, it's years ago now, that, I mean, speed and low cost matters. People think that, but it's not decentralized, blah, 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 you cannot run a node on this and that computer and so on. But most people don't care. They want it to go fast and they want to pay low fees. And it's not, and then comes the argument, but rich people can afford to pay high fees. Okay, but that has turned out to not be a relevant argument. Rich people also don't like to spend money just because they have it. Many people with money are even, more cheap than people with less money. So it's just not correct. They also don't want to spend money, wasting money, sending, $100 swap transactions if it costs like that. And the people don't want to wait. They want it to go quickly and they want to use it. And that was really my thesis, why I really believed in this Binance Smart Chain during the previous cycle, because they offered exactly that, arguably with a lot less decentralization than Ethereum. But I still thought, I think it's going to take off because people don't care about decentralized. They care about permissionless. They want to be able to access the chain and do their swaps, and they don't really care about the rest. And now we have Solana, which kind of does that, only better and better decentralization. So we talked about it many times, and then they ran into real technical issues, which in a way is a nice problem to have. It's a nice problem to hitting up against the demand ceiling. And technically everything can be solved, but of course it takes a little bit of time. And while we move to the end of the agenda, guys, you can write questions in the chat and we will try to answer some questions. Mando, do you want to talk? Sorry.
One last ace in the hole for ETH before we forget. The ETFs in Hong Kong are opening in what, 5 or 6 hours, which includes Bitcoin and Ethereum. How long before they add Solana? And how big will the Ethereum pump be? I think it'll be 80-90% Bitcoin, but just something to bear in mind. We could see some action tonight.
Yeah, I can add that actually because we have a couple of people in our community who live in Hong Kong, and they said they have actually not seen public advertisement or something for this. So it's done more to maybe private channels to larger investors. Not really. It's not like in the subway or on downtown. But if anyone sees more on the ground, guys in the chat, please share what you see on the ground, because I haven't been in Hong Kong for recently, so don't know myself. Should we cover a little bit the new topic also? NFTs, airdrops, memes, things we haven't really covered. Mando, you are really knowledgeable in this space. I'm reading your information on Twitter. And by the way, guys, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to James on YouTube and Twitter X. And Mando, you are mainly on Twitter X, and you have a newsletter. So links in the description. And yeah, definitely subscribe.
Yeah, so it hasn't been that great a week, I would say, for the left curve part of the market. I would say this move in Bitcoin and the move in Solana did kind of hurt a lot of the meme part of the market. So most of those coins have not really had a good period. We have seen some big airdrops coming. So notably, you have Eigenlayer, which people say could be multi billions, which should be quite a big one. Friendtech has been an interesting one. This has been one of the social fi platforms, which is built on Base. Again, had a bit of a checkered past. People used it and then they stopped using it, but that has a big airdrop. I think that's maybe today or tomorrow. You have Drift, which is a protocol on Solana, and then you have Renzo, which is an L2. Which is a restaking platform on ETH. So 4 relatively big airdrops. So definitely be checking for those sort of things. I think the ones that will really pop out for people will be how Friendtech does, given the past. And I think a lot of people who have been dancing around, let's say, memes and NFTs and all that sort of stuff, they've definitely been on Friendtech. They were farming it. It'll be interesting to see. In terms of the other stuff that I see people looking at in my space a lot, Blast. And a lot of what's been going on in Blast, which is an L2 built on ETH, and they've kind of pitched themselves as a more degen chain, and you've seen various different protocols spun up there, and people are now going after points and for that airdrop, which I think should be in the next month or so. That's a very, very near term one. So that's the focus. A lot of what people were making money on over the last 2 months, they're not making money on now. It's because of the way that the majors have moved. Bitcoin being down 20% means your average, I know you're trying to make a 10x on is probably down about 60 or 70%. And that's just the nature of crypto. But part of it is just people now trying to refresh new narratives. It does feel as though, I don't know, I feel like there have been some hot takes about meme coins in general to the cycle. Mert, who is one of the most well-known Solana devs, actually put a piece out the other day defending them, being like, meme coins have done more for the space than any sort of these alt L1s, which no one uses. And I think he used the example of Cardano in that, which is maybe a bit of a spicy take, but for adoption, I do think some of those can be slightly even worse. People hold on to these sort of narratives for much longer. A lot of VCs have actually come out in the last week and said that they don't like the meme coin space. They think it's bad for crypto adoption. A lot of users have come back and said, look, makes sense that VCs don't like crypto, because a lot of the time they're trying to sell you vaporware, which never really catches on, and they're dumping tokens on you from private sales. So it's been a bit of a battlefield, I would say. That's all I would say. A lot of hot takes, not a lot of money being made, some airdrops to come, and I would say my timeline, a lot of it's focused on what's going on in Blast, because people think that's going to be a big airdrop.
I can just add to everyone who has made a lot of money on the meme coins, don't ride it all the way back down again, like many did. Many of these meme coins will only have one pump. Not all of them. Some will kind of transition into something more long-term and more serious, but many will have a curve that looks like this, and there is no second pump on these ones. While, of course, there's some that kind of transition to becoming something else. So thanks for that. Let's take a couple of comments. This relates to the Hong Kong. Okay, perhaps they're not allowed to advertise yet. That could be an explanation. Let's see. Mando, how did you miss the opportunity to call yourself the Mando Lorian?
That's part
What's the
of
background actually behind your
my name.
So let me share it. So this is Mando's Twitter account called rektmando. What is the background to the choosing that name?
Mando is just a name I got called for about, I don't know, 12 years. When I started on a trading desk, it was full of Americans who found my name way too boring. My name is Michael Anderson. So they came up with Mando, and that stuck throughout my whole trading career in TradFi. And then it kind of stuck when I went into crypto because everyone called me Mando. And yeah, that's just kind of how the name happened. But yeah, I'm a big fan.
Why Rekt? Did you get raked and learn from it and build on that experience, or is it just
part of that is that. Part of that is I actually came up in the NFT world, and I helped co-create a project called Rekt Guys alongside another trader of mine, OSF. So we own Rekt Guys, which is kind of I would say a well-known NFT project, and me and him are involved in it. I'm not here to shill it, but that's where the name came from.
Oh, very interesting. I didn't know that. Let's take some more questions. If the ETFs hold a lot of BTC and similar like Grayscale, how will this affect how decentralized BTC actually can be? James, what's your take on this?
That is a big concern. But the beauty of Bitcoin is it is very decentralized. There's a lot of long-term holders. Right now, last time I counted, I think it was Friday or Saturday morning, all the ETFs and ETPs around the world own about 853,000 Bitcoin. Considering there's only 15 million or less will ever exist because so many are lost in the Satoshi lockup, that's actually a big chunk. But it's going to be hard for them to get to, say, half of that amount. And that will be kind of the tipping point where I get concerned. But we might see a revolt as well. One of the things that does concern me is the way Coinbase is doing custody for many of these new ETFs, and that's too much of a concentration I don't like. Like, imagine, heaven forbid, something happens to Coinbase, they get hacked. That could be the worst hit to the system ever. So those are like the paranoia things I think about sometimes.
Yeah. Here's a big one, looking now at people feeling that it might be losing support and so on. Was the last bull cut short manipulated on the downside? 100%. And of course, it's a big wide question. What does it mean manipulated and so on and so forth? What's your take, James?
100% manipulated. And we know the players as well. All that came out in Discovery. It was FTX. That guy, Sam Bankman-Fried, was very anti-Bitcoin, very pro-altcoins, and he gave it a haircut, as well as some other nefarious players in the industry. So it was very manipulated. A lot of people were calling for 100,000 last cycle, and quite frankly, we're stunned. I think my price target, my bull price target, was 89,000 or something, but it didn't happen because the head got cut off, and that's just how the markets work. I'm sure Mando has seen the same thing.
Yeah, I think it was kind of public. That he was hammering it to kind of nurse some of his losses in some of his other coins. So it was also levered on the way up, but the absolute capitulation, which then took out a few hedge funds on the way down, that was I don't know if it's manipulated or he just exploded. You're muted again, CTO.
We're seeing almost a sudden stop to the economy. It's like we hit the wall. So here's another contribution. Okay, thank you. We got thank you for sending. I didn't even see that. Thank you very much. But yeah, I mean, it always feels like that, right? And I think a key point here, if we lose this support, we haven't lost it yet. So perhaps nothing of this will happen. Perhaps tomorrow we're all bullish. Over bullish again, the support 61,800. It hasn't been lost yet. But if we do lose that and start going lower, a lot of people will panic. There will be a lot of panic here. Try to not be in that mode. Try to plan scenarios ahead. If that happens, I'm going to react like that. If this happens, I'm going to do like that. So you have those scenarios planned out beforehand in like a good state of mind. And then if it actually happens, your job is to press the button, not start overthinking your previous plan. There's 2 steps to being successful. Mando, you traded in traditional markets. James, you also, there's like 2 steps to being successful. 1, to have a plan, and 2nd, to follow it. And that is not new to crypto, but it kind of gets exaggerated by crypto because the moves are so big. One day you're like a meme coin millionaire. The next day it's a rug pull, and then you have 0. And the next day it's up again. It's like it is very difficult to manage that from an emotional perspective, and it's necessary to have some kind of plan. Should we take? We're grossly over time.
Yeah, we are. It's not what you make; it's what you keep. Remember
Exactly.
that,
It's not what you make; it's what you keep. So, should we take one more? Last question. Do we want to make some guesses where we end by the year? And just for everyone now, these are not predictions. None of us here know what will happen to the future of markets, but it can be fun to speculate. Do you guys think that we will break all-time high and go higher at this year, or will we go lower and then find footing next year? What's your guess, if we have to guess?
I think we're going higher than 100K. Yeah. My view is that this isn't I've said this before on the show. Like, I don't think this is like a left translation cycle. I think what I like about this cycle is it's actual adoption. It's not just an SBF pump and then smash down. So I would like to think that this isn't just a 1-year cycle. I would like to feel like this is actually going to be a lot more of a long-term adoption as we start to see more and more countries institutionalize, but also adopt crypto. So I only really see us going higher. That being said, like to pinpoint when and how high we go just by the end of this year, I think it's a bit more difficult. But I think Bitcoin could easily go above 100K. It could even go above 200K by the end of the year. Like, it really depends. Like, we just spoke about Bitcoin loves a crisis. If we see a full-blown crisis and we see QE come in, like, all bets are off. Like, Bitcoin could go to crazy levels if we start to see, I don't know, I think Japan's the 3rd biggest economy in the world, or 4th. If we start to see that collapse under a spiral, and then you have to see the US having to print money to help fix that issue, I mean, is there a better case for Bitcoin than that? I don't know. All bets are off if that sort of stuff happens.
James, what's your take?
Since my 2017 thesis, there will come a day when the world will realize how important this is and how scarce it is. Like, you can buy the entire.
I think your audio is a bit.
There's something warbled with your.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Still bad.
Maybe that's a signal that we're too far over the time. It's been a great show, guys. I was very actually curious to hear your takes on many of these issues, and I'm sure that everyone listening will feel the same. So, which channel are we next Monday?
I don't mind. Let's see. I think let's say for default it's James, but maybe we can always stream it on my Twitter, so we have an equal share.
We will figure it out. See you all next Monday, and thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
We'll see what happens next. Thank you. Bye.